The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the country club, sending crystal fragments across my sister's wedding reception. But it wasn't the broken glass that made everyone freeze. It was the federal badge that had just slipped from my uniform pocket and landed face up under the chandelier light, gleaming with official authority that no one in my family knew existed. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Patricia Kellerman, and for the past 3 years, my family thought I was the biggest disappointment in our lineage. While my sister Madison climbed the corporate ladder at her marketing firm, and my brother Tyler finished his residency at Johns Hopkins, I was supposedly slinging coffee and clearing tables at some dive diner in downtown Baltimore. At least, that's what I let them believe. The truth was far more complicated, but maintaining that cover story had become essential to my work. Every family gathering became a minefield of condescending comments and poorly disguised pity. My mother, Eleanor, would introduce me to her friends with that tight smile she reserved for discussing embarrassing relatives. "This is Patricia, my youngest. She's finding herself right now." Finding herself. As if working undercover for the DEA's most sensitive operations was some kind of quarter-life crisis phase. The mockery started small, snide comments about my career choices during holiday dinners. My father, Robert, would slip me $20 bills when he thought no one was looking, whispering about how I needed to get serious about my future. Madison would roll her eyes whenever I showed up to family events in my beat-up Honda Civic instead of something more appropriate for a Kellerman. The Kellermans had a reputation to maintain, after all, 3 generations of lawyers, doctors, and business executives. Robert was a partner at Morrison & Associates, one of Baltimore's most prestigious law firms. Eleanor sat on the boards of half a dozen charities and made sure everyone knew it. Madison had just been promoted to senior account director at 32, managing million-dollar campaigns for Fortune 500 companies. And then there was me, Patricia, the family screw-up who couldn't even hold down a real job. If only they knew that my diner was actually a front operation for one of the largest drug trafficking investigations on the East Coast. That the grease stains on my uniform were carefully applied each morning before I headed into work at Stella's All-Night Cafe, a 24-hour establishment that had become the unofficial headquarters for a network moving product from Miami to New York. For 18 months, I'd been Patricia Wells, a community college dropout from Dundalk who needed the night shift to make ends meet. I'd perfected the tired waitress persona. The slightly slouched shoulders, the way I'd blow a strand of hair out of my face while balancing plates, the practiced small talk that made customers comfortable enough to conduct business right in front of me. The cafe attracted exactly the clientele we'd hoped for. Truckers making long-haul runs with modified cargo spaces. Local dealers who thought a public place with background noise was perfect for exchanges. Mid-level distributors who liked conducting business over coffee and pie at 3 a.m, assuming the exhausted waitress wasn't paying attention to anything beyond getting their orders right. They were wrong. Every conversation was memorized, every face cataloged, every license plate number discreetly photographed when I stepped out for smoke breaks I didn't actually take. The information I gathered had already led to 17 arrests and the seizure of over $2 million in narcotics and cash. But my family didn't know any of this. They couldn't know any of this. The DEA had been very clear about maintaining operational security. My cover couldn't be blown by well-meaning relatives asking too many questions or accidentally mentioning details that didn't add up. So I played the part of the underachieving daughter, let them believe I was wasting my criminology degree from University of Maryland, and endured their disappointment as the price of keeping Baltimore streets a little bit safer. The worst part wasn't even the condescension. It was watching how it affected my relationships with extended family. Cousins who used to text me regularly started treating me like I might ask them for money. Aunts and uncles would give me those sympathetic looks usually reserved for people going through messy divorces or public scandals. At Madison's engagement party 6 months ago, my cousin Derek had actually tried to set me up with his mechanic friend, thinking we'd be perfect for each other since we were both working with our hands. The mechanic was a perfectly nice guy, but Derek's reasoning made it clear exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. Madison's fiancé, Jonathan Westbrook III, treated me like I might steal the silverware. His parents, old-money Baltimore elite, looked genuinely puzzled every time someone explained that, yes, the waitress was related to the bride. Eleanor spent most of that party making excuses for my absence from various social functions, explaining that I was working with the same tone people use to discuss chronic illnesses. The engagement party was also where Madison announced their wedding plans, a lavish affair at the Belvedere Country Club, complete with a guest list that read like a who's who of Baltimore society. 200 of their closest friends and family members, she'd said with obvious pride. Everyone who mattered would be there. Including me, apparently, though Madison's invitation came with some pointed suggestions about dressing appropriately and maybe doing something different with your hair. She'd even offered to pay for a salon appointment, which somehow managed to be both generous and insulting at the same time. Tyler had been slightly more supportive, probably because medical residency had given him some perspective on what real exhaustion looked like. But even he couldn't hide his concern about my life choices. During a rare moment alone at the engagement party, he'd asked if I was happy with where things were going, in that careful way people probe when they think you're having a breakdown but don't want to trigger one. I'm exactly where I need to be, I'd told him, which was the absolute truth, even if he interpreted it as defensive deflection from someone in denial about her problems. The irony was devastating. While my family worried about my future and whispered about intervention strategies, I was building a case that would likely result in federal prosecution for over 30 individuals involved in interstate drug trafficking. My work had earned commendations from supervisors who couldn't publicly acknowledge my contributions without compromising ongoing operations. Agent Sarah Morrison, my handler, had told me just last week that my intelligence gathering was some of the best fieldwork she'd seen in 15 years with the DEA. The cafe operation was so successful that they were considering extending it another 6 months to see how far up the supply chain we could trace connections. But none of that mattered at family dinners, where Madison talked about her latest client acquisitions while I pushed mashed potatoes around my plate and answered vague questions about whether the, quote, restaurant business was treating me well. None of it mattered when Eleanor introduced me to her book club friends as the daughter who was still figuring things out. None of it mattered when Robert slipped me those $20 bills with genuine concern in his eyes, worried about his youngest daughter's financial stability. The hardest part was seeing how proud they were of Madison and Tyler's accomplishments, knowing I couldn't share the real source of my own pride in the work I was doing. When Madison got her promotion, the whole family celebrated with dinner at Charleston. When Tyler published his first research paper, Eleanor framed it and hung it in the hallway next to his medical school diploma. My accomplishments were classified, my successes were invisible, and my dedication to public service looked exactly like failure from the outside. So I kept showing up to family gatherings in my worn jeans and sneakers, kept deflecting questions about my plans, and kept letting them worry about what would become of Patricia Kellerman, the family disappointment who couldn't seem to get her life together. What they didn't know was that Patricia Kellerman was doing just fine. It was Patricia Wells, the undercover persona, who was about to have a very bad day. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning at 3:47 a.m., when Marcus Rivera walked into Stella's all-night cafe with blood on his jacket and panic in his eyes. I'd been monitoring Marcus for 6 weeks. Mid-level distributor, careful but not paranoid, with connections stretching from the Baltimore docks to distribution networks in Philadelphia. He usually conducted business with the calm efficiency of someone running a legitimate enterprise. Seeing him rattled was like watching a master poker player suddenly reveal their hand. "Coffee, black," he muttered, sliding into booth 7, his usual spot in the back corner where he could watch both entrances. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone. I poured the coffee with practiced indifference, but every instinct I'd developed over 3 years of fieldwork was screaming that something major had shifted in the organization we'd been tracking. When Marcus started making frantic calls in rapid-fire Spanish, switching between what sounded like damage control and desperate bargaining, I knew our timeline had just accelerated dramatically. Agent Morrison's voice crackled through my nearly invisible earpiece during my routine bathroom break 20 minutes later. "We've got chatter on multiple channels. Something big went sideways tonight. How's your friend?" "Stressed," I whispered into the concealed microphone. making calls, mentioning names we haven't heard before, higher up the chain. Stay close, this might be our break. Our break. After 18 months of careful observation and intelligence gathering, we were finally getting glimpses of the upper-level organization that had remained frustratingly elusive. The cafe operation had been incredibly successful at mapping the lower and middle tiers of the network, but the top remained a mystery. We knew product was flowing through Baltimore in massive quantities, but the real decision-makers stayed invisible. Marcus finished his calls and ordered pie. Apple, which he never did. Another sign that tonight was different. As I served him, he grabbed my wrist with surprising gentleness. "You got kids, Patricia?" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The question caught me off guard. In all our previous interactions, Marcus had never shown interest in my personal life beyond the basic pleasantries that established rapport. No, why? Good. This business, it's getting dangerous. People like you, honest people just trying to make a living. You should think about finding somewhere else to work. He left $40 for a $7 order and walked out into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving me with the distinct impression that whatever had happened tonight was about to change everything for everyone involved in this operation. By the time my shift ended at 8 a.m., we had confirmation that a major shipment had been intercepted by a rival organization, resulting in 3 deaths and the loss of approximately $2 million in product. The network was in chaos, with lower-level dealers scrambling to figure out what it meant for their own operations and higher-ups apparently demanding immediate action. Agent Morrison met me at our usual debrief location, a parking garage downtown where we could talk without surveillance concerns. "This is accelerating faster than we anticipated," she said, reviewing my notes from the night's observations. "Intelligence suggests they're planning some kind of retaliation within the next few days. We need to be ready to move." "Move how?" "Full operation. Coordinated arrests across multiple locations. We've been building cases for 18 months. It's time to execute before they reorganize or disappear." The timing couldn't have been worse. Madison's wedding was 4 days away, and my required attendance at all the pre-wedding festivities meant I'd be largely unavailable for the final phases of case preparation. Morrison understood, but the look on her face made it clear that this was far from ideal timing. "Can you maintain your cover through the weekend? We'll need you available for immediate deployment if the situation changes." I assured her I could, but privately wondered if I was about to miss the most significant operation of my career because I had to smile and pretend to be impressed by Madison's choice of wedding favors. The next 3 days blurred together in a strange double life that was more intense than anything I'd experienced during the entire undercover operation. Days were consumed with wedding preparation activities that seemed surreal given what I knew was happening in the criminal investigation. Evenings were spent at Stella's, watching the network continue to unravel as paranoia and suspicion infected every interaction. Madison's rehearsal dinner was held at Harbor East, an upscale waterfront restaurant where the Kellerman and Westbrook families could display their social connections and refined taste. I arrived directly from my shift, having barely had time to change out of my diner uniform and into the black dress Madison had deemed appropriate, but not attention-seeking. The contrast was jarring. One moment, I was serving coffee to drug dealers planning retribution for a multi-million-dollar theft. The next, I was making small talk with Jonathan's banker friends about interest rates and market volatility. Eleanor had seated me at the far end of the family table, next to Madison's college roommate and her husband, both of whom seemed genuinely puzzled about why the bride's sister looked so uncomfortable at such a lovely event. They asked polite questions about my work, and I gave the same vague responses I'd perfected over months of family gatherings. "Restaurant work must be so interesting," the roommate said with the kind of forced enthusiasm people use when they can't think of anything genuinely positive to say. "You must meet all kinds of people." If she only knew. Tyler, sitting across from me, kept shooting concerned glances in my direction. As the evening progressed, it became clear that the family had had some kind of discussion about my situation. The questions were more pointed than usual, the suggestions about other opportunities more direct. Patricia, Jonathan's father, knows people in the service industry, Madison announced during the toast, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure nearby tables could hear. Real restaurants. Not, well, places with advancement opportunities. The implication was clear. Even my sister's wedding was being used as an intervention disguised as networking. Jonathan Westbrook Sr. nodded approvingly, clearly briefed on his role in helping to rehabilitate the bride's wayward sister. Happy to make some calls, he said, with the confidence of someone accustomed to solving problems with the right connections. A young woman with your work ethic just needs the right environment to flourish. Quote, I smiled and thanked him, wondering what he'd think if he knew that my, quote, ethic had contributed to investigations that would likely result in federal prison sentences for 37 individuals involved in interstate drug trafficking. The evening's most surreal moment came when Eleanor stood to give her mother of the bride toast. She talked about Madison's accomplishments, her bright future with Jonathan, and her pride in having raised children who were making meaningful contributions to society. The pause before that last phrase made it clear that children was being used in the plural as a polite fiction. As she spoke, my phone buzzed with a text from Agent Morrison. Network moving faster than expected. I may need to execute tomorrow. Stay ready. Tomorrow was the wedding. I excused myself to the restroom and called Morrison back. How much faster? Intelligence suggests they're planning something major for tomorrow night. We can't wait. If this goes down during your family event, I'll handle it. Patricia, if we have to blow your cover during your sister's wedding. I said I'll handle it. But privately, I was terrified. Not of the operation. I'd been preparing for this moment for 18 months. I was terrified of the moment my family would discover that everything they thought they knew about me was a lie. That their disappointment and concern had been based on a completely false understanding of who I was and what I'd been doing with my life. The rehearsal dinner ended with hugs and promises to see everyone bright and early for the wedding day preparations. Madison squeezed my hand as we said goodbye. Thank you for being here, Patty. I know this isn't really your scene, but it means everything to me that you're part of this. She hadn't called me Patty since we were kids. The unexpected tenderness in her voice made my chest tight with guilt and affection and dread. As I drove home through the empty streets of Baltimore, past the neighborhoods where I'd spent 18 months building relationships with criminals who trusted Patricia Wells enough to conduct business in front of her, I realized that tomorrow would change everything. One way or another, the person my family thought I was would cease to exist. The only question was whether they'd be proud of who I really was, or if the deception would be too much to forgive. Madison's wedding day began at 5:30 a.m. with 3 rapid knocks on my apartment door, and Agent Morrison standing in my hallway holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the grim expression I'd learned to associate with operations going sideways. We have a problem, she said, pushing past me into the living room. Our friends decided to move their timeline up. Intelligence indicates they're planning to hit a rival distribution center this afternoon during your sister's ceremony. I stared at her, still processing the implications. This afternoon? The wedding starts at 4, which is exactly why they chose this timing. Maximum chaos, minimal law enforcement attention. Everyone's focused on weekend activities, lighter patrol schedules, slower emergency response times. It's actually brilliant. She spread photographs across my coffee table, surveillance images from the past 24 hours showing increased activity at locations we'd been monitoring. Cars arriving at unusual hours, meetings in parking lots, weapons being moved in gym bags and toolboxes. We've identified the target, a warehouse in Fells Point that's been storing products for the Herrera organization. Intelligence suggests they're planning a full assault, not just theft, but elimination of competition. We're talking about potential casualties in double digits. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. 3 years of careful undercover work, 18 months of building trust and mapping criminal networks, and it was all coming to a head during the 4 hours I was supposed to be watching my sister get married. What do you need from me? Morrison's expression softened slightly. We need you to make a choice, Patricia. We can execute this operation without you. We have enough intelligence from your work to move forward. But if you're available for real-time coordination, we can save lives and potentially prevent a war between organizations that could destabilize drug enforcement efforts across the entire East Coast. She paused, studying my face. Or you can turn off your phone, go to the wedding, and let us handle this without you. No judgment either way. You've already given us more than we had any right to ask for. But we both knew there wasn't really a choice. Not for me. I'll be available. You understand what this might mean? If the operation goes public during the wedding. I understand. Morrison gathered the photographs and headed for the door. Ceremony starts at 4, reception at 6. We're planning to move at 5:30 during the cocktail hour when your absence might not be immediately noticed. Stay ready. After she left, I sat in my empty apartment, staring at the bridesmaid dress hanging on my closet door, pale blue silk that Madison had chosen to complement her color scheme, and tried to imagine explaining to my family why I was about to disappear during the most important day of my sister's life. The morning preparations took place at Eleanor's house, where Madison had transformed the master bedroom into a bridal headquarters complete with professional hair and makeup stations, champagne service, and a photographer documenting every moment for posterity. "Patricia, finally!" Madison called as I arrived, already radiant in her robe with her hair half finished. "Mom was worried you'd overslept." Eleanor shot me a look that suggested oversleeping was the least of her concerns about my reliability, but she managed to smile. "The hairdresser can fit you in after Aunt Linda. Nothing too dramatic. We want everyone to look elegant, but not, well, you understand." I understood perfectly. Don't upstage the bride. Don't draw attention to yourself. Don't remind anyone that family disappointment is part of the wedding party. The next few hours passed in a blur of beauty treatments, champagne toasts, and the kind of feminine bonding that happens when women prepare for major life events together. Madison's college friends shared embarrassing stories about her dating life before Jonathan. Eleanor fussed over every detail with the intensity of someone orchestrating a military campaign. Tyler's girlfriend, Amy, helped coordinate logistics with the wedding planner. I tried to participate, tried to focus on this moment that Madison had been planning for months, but my phone kept buzzing with encrypted messages from Morrison providing updates on the developing situation. 11:30, multiple vehicles observed at target location, escalation likely. 12:15, weapons confirmed, operation moving to the active phase. 1:45, all units in position, waiting for final intelligence. At 2:30, while Madison was getting into her dress and Eleanor was having what appeared to be a minor breakdown about the flower arrangements, Morrison called. "We need you now," she said without preamble. "The situation is accelerating. They've moved up their timeline. Intelligence suggests they're going in within the next hour. If we don't intercept, we're looking at potential casualties and a criminal organization war that could take years to resolve." I stepped into Eleanor's walk-in closet, surrounded by Madison's childhood trophies and family photographs. "I'm at the wedding preparations. The ceremony starts in 90 minutes. Patricia, I need you to understand what we're dealing with. This isn't just about drug seizures anymore. We have intelligence suggesting this retaliation involves eliminating witnesses, including civilians who might have information about their operations. People like the staff at certain all-night establishments where business has been conducted." My blood went cold. She was talking about Stella's. About Maria, the cook who worked the overnight shift with me. About Danny, the dishwasher who always asked about my family. About regular customers who had nothing to do with criminal activity, but happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. "How long do I have?" "We need you mobile and ready for immediate deployment. The operation launches in 30 minutes. I looked through the closet doorway at my sister, radiant in her wedding dress, while Eleanor and Amy made final adjustments to her veil. Madison was glowing with happiness, surrounded by everyone she loved most, on what was supposed to be the perfect day she'd dreamed about since childhood. "I'll be there." "Patricia," I said, "I'll be there." I hung up and stood in that closet for another minute, listening to the sounds of celebration coming from the bedroom. Madison laughed at something Tyler had said. Eleanor gives last-minute instructions to the photographer. Amy asked if anyone had seen the backup lipstick. Normal family sounds, the sounds of people who loved each other preparing for one of life's happiest moments. Then I walked back into the bedroom, where Madison immediately grabbed my hands. "You look beautiful, Patty. That blue is perfect for you." I was still in my robe. My hair was only half done. I hadn't even started my makeup. "Madison, I need to tell you something." The room went quiet. Eleanor stopped fussing with the flower arrangements. Tyler looked up from his phone. Amy paused mid-sip of her champagne. "I have to leave." The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. "Leave?" Madison's voice was very small. "Leave where?" "I have an emergency at work. Something I can't get out of." Quote. Eleanor's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally a kind of resigned disappointment that was somehow worse than outright fury. "An emergency," she repeated slowly. "At the diner." "Yes. On my wedding day," Madison said. "You have a diner emergency on my wedding day." Tyler stood up. "Patricia, what kind of emergency could possibly—" "I can't explain right now. I just need you to trust me." "Trust you?" Madison's voice was rising. "You want me to trust you to abandon my wedding for some restaurant crisis that probably involves covering for someone who didn't show up for their shift?" Amy started backing toward the door, clearly recognizing that she was about to witness a family meltdown that she had no business being part of. Eleanor sat down heavily on the bed. "Patricia, I have spent months making excuses for you. Months explaining to people why you can't commit to anything, why you can't be relied upon, why you're not living up to your potential. And now, on the most important day of your sister's life, you're proving every single person right who has ever doubted you." The words hit like physical blows. Because from their perspective, she was absolutely right. This looked exactly like the behavior of someone who couldn't prioritize, couldn't commit, couldn't be trusted with important responsibilities. "I know how this looks." "No, you don't," Madison interrupted, her voice breaking. "You don't know how this looks because if you did, you wouldn't be doing it. You wouldn't be choosing strangers at some dive restaurant over your own family. You wouldn't be walking out on the people who love you most." My phone buzzed. Morrison, probably wondering where I was. "I have to go." "Then go," Eleanor said quietly. "But understand that if you walk out that door, you're choosing to not be part of this family. You're choosing your job over your sister. You're choosing whatever crisis seems more important than being here for the people who have spent years trying to help you." Madison turned away from me, facing the mirror where moments before she'd been glowing with happiness. Now she looked like someone trying not to cry and ruin her makeup at the same time. "Get out," she whispered. "Just get out." I changed clothes in the guest bathroom, hands shaking as I pulled on jeans and a dark sweater suitable for tactical operations. As I headed for the door, Tyler intercepted me in the hallway. "This is really what you're choosing?" he asked. "Whatever's happening at that restaurant is really more important than Madison's wedding." I looked at my brother, kind, concerned Tyler, who'd spent months worrying about my life choices and trying to figure out how to help me get back on track. "Yes," I said, "it really is." His face fell. "Then I don't know who you are anymore." "Neither do I thought as I walked out of Eleanor's house, leaving behind the sounds of my sister's wedding preparations and possibly the last chance I'd ever have to be part of this family. But 20 minutes later, as I suited up in tactical gear alongside DEA agents preparing to prevent what intelligence suggested could be a massacre, I knew I'd made the only choice I could live with, even if it meant losing everything else. The warehouse in Fells Point was a maze of shipping containers and industrial equipment that provided perfect cover for what was about to become the largest coordinated drug bust in Baltimore's history. At 4:15 p.m., exactly 15 minutes after Madison's ceremony was supposed to begin, I crouched behind a stack of pallets wearing full tactical gear, listening to Agent Morrison coordinate 12 different teams through my earpiece. Alpha team in position, Bravo team holding at the north entrance. Charlie team, what's your status? Charlie team ready. We count 8 vehicles, approximately 20 suspects visible. They're armed and moving fast. Through my binoculars, I watched Marcus Rivera directing operations with the kind of military precision that explained how this organization had stayed ahead of law enforcement for so long. He was orchestrating the systematic execution of a rival crew, planning to eliminate witnesses and competition in one coordinated strike. Patricia, you're our eyes on the interior. Can you confirm target identification? I'd spent 18 months memorizing faces, building relationships, and understanding the hierarchy. Now I was using that intelligence to prevent what could have been the largest mass casualty event in Baltimore's recent criminal history. Confirmed. Rivera is the running point. I see Tommy Castellanos from the dock crew, Maria Santos from the laundering operation, and at least 6 others from our target list. This is the entire middle management structure. Outstanding. All teams prepare for coordinated entry in 60 seconds. 60 seconds. In 60 seconds, everything I'd worked for over the past 3 years would culminate in arrests that could dismantle a criminal network responsible for flooding the East Coast with narcotics. And somewhere across town, my sister was walking down the aisle without me, probably believing I'd chosen a restaurant shift over the most important day of her life. All teams, execute, execute, execute. The next 20 minutes were controlled chaos. Flashbang grenades, shouted commands, suspects dropping weapons and raising hands as they realized they were surrounded by federal agents. Marcus Rivera tried to run, but I'd mapped every exit during my months of intelligence gathering. We knew exactly where he'd go. Runner heading east toward the loading dock, I called out, moving to intercept. I've got him. 3 years of maintaining physical fitness standards for undercover work paid off as I sprinted through the warehouse, navigating obstacles and closing distance. When Rivera saw me coming, his expression shifted from determination to confusion to something like betrayal. Patricia, what the hell? DEA, get on the ground. He stared at me for another second, probably trying to reconcile the exhausted waitress who'd served him coffee hundreds of times, with the federal agent pointing a weapon at his chest. Then his shoulders sagged and he dropped to his knees. Son of a bitch, he muttered as I cuffed him. You played us all. Yeah, I did. By 5:45 p.m., we had 37 suspects in custody and had seized approximately $4 million in narcotics, weapons, and cash. The warehouse operation had uncovered evidence of criminal activity stretching from Miami to Boston, with connections to organizations in 3 different states. Agent Morrison found me completing paperwork in one of the mobile command units, still wearing tactical gear but feeling the adrenaline slowly drain away. Hell of a job, Patricia. This is going to make careers and save lives. How many? Casualties? 0. We prevented what intelligence suggests could have been 8 to 12 murders tonight, plus unknown civilian casualties if this had escalated into a territorial war. 0 casualties. The choice I'd made, walking away from Madison's wedding, destroying my relationships with everyone I loved most, had prevented a massacre. The media's going to want this story, Morrison continued. Federal agents go undercover for 3 years, build criminal relationships, and prevent major violence. You're going to be the poster child for effective long-term operations. Media attention, which meant my cover was permanently blown, which meant my family was about to learn exactly why I'd walked out on Madison's wedding day. I need to get back. Patricia, the operation isn't over. We have interrogations, evidence processing, case preparation. I need to get back to my sister's wedding. Morrison studied my face. That's probably not a good idea. Give your family some time to cool down. Let them process what happened before you try to explain. But I was already pulling off the tactical vest, already calculating drive time back to the Belvedere Country Club. The ceremony was over, but the reception would go until midnight. Maybe I could salvage something. The country club parking lot was full of luxury cars and well-dressed people moving between the main building and the garden pavilion, where Madison had planned to hold the reception. Through the windows, I could see elegant tables decorated with flowers that had probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Guests dancing to a live band, the kind of sophisticated celebration that the Kellerman family specialized in hosting. I sat in my Honda Civic for 10 minutes, still wearing jeans and a dark sweater that smelled like warehouse dust and tactical operations, trying to figure out what I could possibly say to explain the last few hours. Finally, I walked through the front entrance like someone who belonged there, which was technically true even if I looked like I'd been arrested rather than attending the reception. Eleanor spotted me first. She was standing near the bar with several of her charity board friends, probably explaining my absence with the kind of diplomatic language she'd perfected over months of making excuses for my behavior. When she saw me, her face went through the same progression of expressions I'd seen that morning: confusion, disbelief, and resigned disappointment. "Patricia, how nice of you to join us." The ice in her voice could have preserved food for a week. "Where's Madison?" "Your sister's having the time of her life at her wedding reception, no thanks to you." She spent the first hour explaining to guests why her maid of honor wasn't there, making excuses for behavior that has no excuse. Quote, "Eleanor's friends were watching this interaction with the fascination people reserve for public family drama at social events. I could practically see them mentally composing the stories they'd tell at their next book club meeting. I need to talk to her. You need to leave. You've done enough damage for one day." But Madison had spotted me from across the room, and her expression was something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, something closer to grief. She excused herself from a conversation with Jonathan's business partners and walked toward me with the careful composure of someone trying not to cause a scene at their own wedding reception. "So the diner emergency resolved itself?" she asked when she reached me. Her wedding dress was perfect, her makeup flawless, her smile bright enough to fool anyone who didn't know her well. But I could see the hurt in her eyes. "Madison, I can explain." Can you explain why covering someone's shift was more important than being my maid of honor? Can you explain why strangers at a restaurant matter more than your own family?" Other guests were starting to notice our conversation. Tyler appeared at Madison's shoulder, still in his groomsman tuxedo, looking like he was preparing to escort me out if necessary. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "You made your choice this afternoon. Let Madison enjoy her wedding without any more drama." I had to leave because what? Because you couldn't handle the responsibility? Because commitment scares you? Because it's easier to run away than to show up for the people who love you? The words hung in the air between us, surrounded by the sounds of celebration and happiness that I'd walked away from. From their perspective, Tyler was absolutely right. My behavior looked exactly like someone who couldn't prioritize family over work, who couldn't be trusted with important responsibilities. And I couldn't tell him the truth, not here, not like this, not surrounded by 200 guests who had no business hearing about federal drug investigations. "You're right," I said finally. "I couldn't handle it." Madison's face crumpled slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Then why are you here now?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Morrison's ringtone. I glanced at the screen and saw her name, probably calling with updates about the operation or questions about evidence. But as I reached for the phone, my badge holder, the one I'd forgotten to remove after changing out of tactical gear, shifted in my pocket and slipped out, landing on the polished marble floor of the country club, with a metallic clatter that seemed impossibly loud in the elegant reception hall. The DEA badge lay there between Madison and me, its federal seal reflecting the chandelier light, completely unmistakable for what it was. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Madison stared at the badge, then at me, then back at the badge. Tyler's mouth fell open. Eleanor stepped closer, her charity board friends craning their necks to see what had caused the sudden quiet. "What is that?" Madison whispered. I picked up the badge, holding it in my palm where she could see the Drug Enforcement Administration seal, my name, and my federal identification number. "This is why I had to leave." The color drained from Madison's face. "You're a federal agent?" "DEA, for 3 years. The diner job was undercover work. Today we arrested 37 people involved in drug trafficking and prevented what could have been multiple murders." Tyler sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "You're a cop?" "Federal agent. The restaurant was a front operation. I've been gathering intelligence on a criminal organization that was moving narcotics from Miami to Boston through Baltimore." Eleanor looked like she was struggling to process information that contradicted everything she thought she knew about her youngest daughter. "The diner," she said slowly, "was where drug dealers conducted business because they thought the waitress wasn't paying attention. I've been memorizing conversations, photographing license plates, and building cases for 18 months. Madison was staring at me like I was someone she'd never seen before, which, in a way, I was. All this time, when we thought you were... She gestured helplessly. When we were worried about you, trying to help you, you were working for the federal government? Yes. And today, when you left my wedding, you were... preventing what intelligence suggested could have been 8 to 12 murders, plus unknown civilian casualties. The reception continued around us, other guests dancing and celebrating while my family tried to absorb the revelation that their greatest disappointment was actually their most accomplished member. Jonathan appeared at Madison's side, clearly sensing that something significant was happening but unsure what role he should play. Is everything okay over here? Madison held up my badge. My sister is a federal agent. The sister we thought was a screw-up who couldn't hold down a real job is actually working undercover for the Drug Enforcement Administration. Jonathan's expression shifted through confusion to something like respect. Seriously? Seriously. And this afternoon, instead of being my maid of honor, she was preventing a massacre. She looked at me with tears starting to form in her eyes. God, Patricia. All those family dinners where we felt sorry for you? All those times Dad tried to slip you money because he was worried about your finances. All those conversations where Mom made excuses for your career choices. Eleanor was shaking her head slowly. 3 years. 3 years of thinking you were wasting your education, throwing away your potential. I couldn't tell you. Operational security meant... We know, Tyler interrupted. We get it. Jesus, Patricia, we've been treating you like a failure when you were actually... He gestured at the badge. When you were actually doing something that matters. Madison stepped closer, studying my face like she was seeing me for the first time. When Marcus Rivera gave you that warning about finding somewhere else to work, I continued, he was trying to protect someone he thought was an innocent bystander. Tonight, he and 36 other people were arrested for crimes that could put them in federal prison for decades. You saved lives today, Madison said quietly. Yes, and I'm sorry I missed your wedding to do it. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the badge in my hand, probably recalculating every family interaction we'd had over the past 3 years. Then she pulled me into a hug that smelled like expensive perfume and wedding flowers and forgiveness. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I'm so proud of you, and I'm sorry we didn't know. I'm sorry we couldn't support you. Eleanor joined the hug, followed by Tyler, and then Jonathan, and suddenly I was surrounded by my family in the middle of Madison's wedding reception, still holding the federal badge that had just changed everything between us. Agent Kellerman, Madison said when we finally separated, testing how the title sounded. My sister, Agent Patricia Kellerman. Quote, and for the first time in 3 years, that sounded exactly right. The news broke on Monday morning with headlines that made my coffee go cold in my hands. Local DEA agent prevents Baltimore massacre. Federal investigation nets 37 arrests in major drug bust. Undercover waitress saves lives in coordinated operation. My phone had been ringing nonstop since 6 a.m. Reporters, colleagues from other agencies, old friends from college who'd seen my name in the news and couldn't believe the Patricia Kellerman they knew was the same person being called a hero in the Baltimore Sun. But the call that surprised me most came from Derek, my cousin who'd tried to set me up with his mechanic friend at Madison's engagement party. Patricia? Jesus, I can't believe I'm related to someone this badass. I literally tried to fix you up with my buddy because I thought you needed help getting your life together. I laughed despite everything. How's he taking the news? Are you kidding? He's telling everyone he almost dated a federal agent. You've made him the coolest guy in his garage. The media attention was intense, but carefully managed by the DEA's public relations team. They wanted to showcase the success of long-term undercover operations, without compromising ongoing investigations or future operations. I did 3 interviews, one with the local NBC affiliate, one with the Baltimore Sun, and one with a DEA podcast that specialized in highlighting effective law enforcement techniques. In each interview, I stuck to the approved talking points about patience, dedication, and the importance of intelligence gathering in modern drug enforcement. What I didn't mention was how it felt to sit across from Marcus Rivera in an interrogation room and watch him struggle to reconcile the waitress who'd served him coffee with the federal agent, who'd been documenting his every word for 18 months. "You were good," he'd said during one of our sessions. "Really good. I actually worried about you sometimes, you know? Thought you were working too hard, not taking care of yourself." The genuine concern in his voice was one of the hardest parts of the entire operation. These weren't cartoon villains. They were people who'd shown me kindness within the context of their criminal enterprise. Marcus had always tipped well, had asked about my family, had even warned me to find safer employment when he sensed the organization was becoming more dangerous. But he'd also been responsible for coordinating the distribution of narcotics that destroyed families and communities. The kindness he'd shown Patricia Wells didn't erase the harm caused by the organization he helped run. Agent Morrison found me in my new office. I'd been promoted to senior special agent and assigned to coordinate intelligence operations for the Baltimore field office, reviewing case files from the warehouse arrests. "How are you adjusting to life above ground?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Weird. 3 years of pretending to be someone else, and now I have to remember how to be myself." "Any regrets about blowing your cover?" I considered the question. The undercover operation had been the most challenging and rewarding work of my career. Building relationships, gathering intelligence, and ultimately preventing violence had given me a sense of purpose that desk work couldn't match. But the personal cost had been enormous. "Ask me again in 6 months." Morrison smiled. "Fair enough. There's something else we need to discuss." The success of the cafe operation has attracted attention from other field offices. There's talk of expanding the program, using similar long-term undercover placements in other cities. And they want you to head up the training program. Teach other agents how to build and maintain deep cover identities for extended operations. The offer was tempting. Training other agents would mean sharing hard-won knowledge about the psychological challenges of living a double life, the techniques for maintaining operational security while building genuine relationships, and the strategic thinking required for effective intelligence gathering. "I'll think about it." After Morrison left, I returned to reviewing interrogation transcripts, but my concentration was broken by another call. This time it was Eleanor. "Patricia, darling, I hope you don't mind me calling you at work." "Of course not, Mom. What's up?" "Well, the Ladies' Auxiliary is having their annual charity luncheon next month, and several of the members have been asking if you might be available to speak about your work. Nothing too detailed, of course, just something inspirational about public service and dedication." I paused, trying to imagine myself giving a speech to Eleanor's charity friends, the same women who'd spent months hearing about my career struggles and, quote, lack of direction. Quote, "You want me to speak at the Ladies' Auxiliary luncheon? Only if you're comfortable with it. I know your work involves confidentiality, but I thought you might have some general thoughts about service and commitment that would be meaningful to share." Eleanor's voice carried a pride I hadn't heard since Tyler graduated medical school. After 3 years of making excuses for my choices, she was now eager to showcase my accomplishments to her social circle. "I'll check my schedule and let you know." That evening, I drove to Madison and Jonathan's new house in Roland Park, a wedding gift from the Westbrook family that was probably worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. Madison answered the door, still glowing with newlywed happiness, but her expression shifted to concern when she saw my face. "You look exhausted. This media attention must be overwhelming." "It's not the media, it's everything else." She led me to their kitchen, which was larger than my entire apartment and equipped with appliances that belonged in a professional restaurant. We sat at the island while she made tea, and I tried to articulate feelings I was still figuring out myself. "Do you remember what it was like when Tyler was going through his residency?" I asked. "How he'd come to family dinners looking like he hadn't slept in days, talking about life and death decisions, and wondering if he was cut out for the responsibility." Madison nodded. "He questioned everything, whether he was smart enough, whether he could handle the pressure, whether he was helping people or just making things worse." That's how I feel now. For 3 years, I knew exactly who I was and what I was doing. Patricia Wells had a clear purpose, defined relationships, and measurable success. Now I'm back to being Patricia Kellerman, and I'm not sure what that means anymore. It means you're a federal agent who just prevented a massacre. It means you're someone who dedicates her life to protecting other people. It means you're exactly who you've always been, except now we know about it. She was right, but the transition was more complicated than I'd anticipated. The skills I'd developed for undercover work, reading people, maintaining emotional distance, compartmentalizing information, weren't easily turned off. I found myself analyzing conversations for hidden meanings, looking for deception in casual interactions, maintaining operational awareness in social situations that didn't require it. There's something else, I continued. The DEA wants me to head up a training program for long-term undercover operations. It would mean teaching other agents how to do what I just spent 3 years doing. That sounds like an incredible opportunity. It also means staying connected to that world instead of moving on to something else. Madison studied my face while the tea steeped. Do you want to move on to something else? I don't know. 3 years ago, I thought undercover work was exactly what I wanted to do with my career. Now I'm not sure if I want to keep living in that space between truth and deception. What does your gut tell you? Before I could answer, Jonathan walked in from his home office, still wearing a suit despite being in his own house. He'd been adjusting to having a federal agent as a sister-in-law with the same careful politeness he applied to all family relationships. Patricia! I didn't know you were coming by. How are you handling all the media attention? Still figuring it out. He poured himself a glass of wine and joined us at the island. I've been telling everyone at the firm about Madison's sister, the federal agent. Partners who've known our family for years are completely stunned. In a good way? Are you kidding? Having a DEA agent in the family is like having a celebrity. Everyone wants to know what it was really like. Whether it was dangerous. How you managed to keep it secret for so long. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from operational security to family dynamics to career planning. By the time I left, I still hadn't answered Madison's question about what my gut was telling me, but I had a clearer sense of the decision I needed to make. The next morning, I called Morrison and accepted the training position. 6 months later, I stood in front of 12 DEA agents from field offices across the country, beginning a lecture on the psychological challenges of extended undercover operations. The training facility in Quantico was state-of-the-art, equipped with simulation rooms, observation areas, and technology that could recreate virtually any environment an agent might encounter. The most difficult part of deep cover work isn't learning to lie, I told the class. It's learning to live with the truth that everyone you care about believes a lie about who you are. One of the agents raised her hand. How do you maintain relationships when you can't be honest about your work? Quote, you don't. You maintain the appearance of relationships while accepting that the real connection will have to wait until you can tell the truth. And you have to be prepared for the possibility that some relationships won't survive the revelation. After the session, I drove back to Baltimore and stopped by Stella's all-night cafe. The restaurant was still operating, though under new management, and without the criminal clientele that had made it useful for our operation. Maria, the cook who'd worked with me during those long overnight shifts, was still there. Patricia, I read about you in the paper. I can't believe you were really a cop the whole time. Federal agent, and I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth. She shrugged. You were doing your job. Besides, this place is much quieter now. Tips aren't as good, but I don't have to worry about getting caught in the middle of whatever those other customers were involved in. I ordered coffee and sat in booth 7, Marcus Rivera's old spot, looking around at the restaurant that had been my second home for 18 months. The booths looked smaller than I remembered, the lighting harsher, the atmosphere less charged with the energy of secrets and hidden agendas. As I sat there, my phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Family dinner Sunday? Mom wants to hear about your latest case. Obviously don't share anything classified, but she's genuinely interested in your work now. Family dinner. Where Eleanor would ask detailed questions about my career instead of making excuses for my choices. Where Tyler would want to hear about federal law enforcement techniques instead of worrying about my financial stability. Where Madison would introduce me as her sister, the DEA agent, with obvious pride instead of polite deflection. I typed back, I'll be there. And for the first time in 3 years, I meant it without reservation. 2 years after the warehouse operation, I stood at the podium of the FBI Academy's main auditorium, looking out at an audience of federal agents, local law enforcement officers, and criminal justice students who'd come to hear about the evolution of undercover operations in modern drug enforcement. The lecture had become something of a legend in law enforcement circles, not just because of the successful operation, but because of what it represented about the personal costs and rewards of long-term infiltration work. The story had been featured in training manuals, case studies, and even a documentary that premiered on the Discovery Channel 6 months earlier. The question I get asked most frequently, I told the audience, is whether the sacrifice was worth it. Whether preventing those deaths justified the damage to personal relationships and the psychological toll of living a double life for 3 years. In the front row, Agent Morrison smiled. She'd been promoted to assistant director and now oversaw undercover operations for the entire Eastern District. Behind her sat 12 of my former training program graduates, agents who'd gone on to conduct their own successful long-term operations based on techniques we'd developed together. The answer is complicated, I continued, because the question assumes that the sacrifice and the success are separate things. They're not. The success was only possible because of the sacrifice, and the sacrifice only had meaning because of the success. After the lecture, I drove to Baltimore for what had become a monthly tradition, dinner with my family at Charleston, the same restaurant where they'd celebrated Madison's promotion 3 years earlier. But now these dinners were celebrations of different kinds of achievements. Tonight we were celebrating Tyler's engagement to Amy, the girlfriend who'd witnessed my dramatic exit from Madison's wedding preparations. She'd become something of a family legend herself, the woman who'd seen a federal agent have a breakdown and lived to tell about it. "Patricia," Amy called as I walked into the restaurant. "Tell Tyler he's being ridiculous about the bachelor party." Tyler looked embarrassed. "She wants to plan something that involves paintball and laser tag." I'm trying to explain that I'm a surgeon, not a Navy SEAL. "Trust me," I said, giving Amy a hug. "After watching you handle Tyler's family drama for 2 years, you've earned the right to plan whatever kind of bachelor party you want." Eleanor arrived with Robert, both of them carrying the kind of energy that came from people who were genuinely excited about family gatherings instead of obligated to attend them. The transformation in our family dynamics had been gradual but profound. Conversations were more honest, relationships were more authentic, and the undercurrent of worry about my future had been replaced by genuine curiosity about my work. "How was the lecture?" Robert asked, as we were seated. "Did you tell them about the time you had to pretend to be sick to avoid a drug deal that went sideways?" "Dad, I can't share operational details from other cases." "Right, of course. I just think it's fascinating how much strategy is involved in this work, nothing like what you see in movies." Robert had become something of an expert on federal law enforcement procedures, reading everything he could find about undercover operations and drug interdiction strategies. It was his way of trying to understand what I'd been going through during those 3 years, when he thought I was struggling to find direction. Madison and Jonathan arrived last, Madison glowing with the particular radiance of someone in her second trimester of pregnancy. The baby, their first, was due in the spring, and family dinners had recently evolved to include discussions of nursery colors and baby name debates. "How's the training program going?" Madison asked, after we'd ordered. "Are your new agents as stubborn as you were about following protocols?" "Worse. Last week I had one agent argue that she should be allowed to maintain her real name during a deep cover assignment because she didn't want to, quote, lose her identity. I had to explain that losing your identity is literally the point." Eleanor laughed. "Remember when you came home from college talking about criminal justice careers? I thought you meant becoming a lawyer or maybe working for the courts. I never imagined anything like this." "None of us did," Tyler added. "Although looking back, you were always good at keeping secrets. Remember when you planned that surprise party for Mom's 50th birthday? You managed to coordinate with 30 people without her suspecting anything. That's actually a useful skill for undercover work. The ability to compartmentalize information and maintain operational security across multiple relationships." Jonathan, who'd become genuinely interested in the technical aspects of federal law enforcement, leaned forward. "Speaking of operational security, whatever happened to Marcus Rivera? I know you can't discuss active cases, but the warehouse operation was 2 years ago. He pled guilty to federal drug trafficking charges and was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He's currently serving his sentence at a facility in Pennsylvania. Do you ever think about visiting him?" Amy asked. "I mean, you spent 18 months building some kind of relationship, even if it was based on deception." The question caught me off guard, though it shouldn't have. I'd been thinking about Marcus Rivera more frequently lately, especially since I'd started training other agents who would face similar situations, developing genuine feelings for people they were investigating. "Sometimes. But what would be the point? I can't apologize for doing my job, and he can't apologize for choices that put people in danger. The relationship was built on a lie that served a necessary purpose. That's very philosophical, Madison said gently, but how do you feel about it? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I looked at the screen, my breath caught. The message was short. Agent Kellerman, this is Marcus Rivera. I'm being released next month. Would you be willing to meet for coffee? I have some things I'd like to say. The table went quiet as they noticed my expression. Everything okay? Robert asked. I showed them the message. Marcus Rivera wants to meet when he gets out of prison. Eleanor's face shifted to concern. Is that safe? Should you report this to your supervisors? Probably. And yes? Tyler frowned. You're not actually considering it, are you? I don't know, maybe. Patricia, Madison said carefully, what could he possibly want to say that would be worth the risk? I'm not sure what he wants to say. Maybe it's about what I need to hear. The conversation continued through dinner, with everyone offering opinions about whether meeting with Marcus would be wise, necessary, or dangerous. By the time we said goodbye in the restaurant parking lot, I still hadn't decided what to do. 3 weeks later, I sat in a coffee shop in Federal Hill, not Stella's, which would have been too loaded with history, but a generic chain restaurant that felt appropriately neutral for a conversation between a federal agent and a former target. Marcus arrived exactly on time, looking older than I remembered, but healthier than I'd expected. Prison had aged him, but it had also given him a kind of clarity that hadn't been there during our original relationship. Agent Kellerman, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. Patricia is fine, and I'm still not sure why I'm here. Quote. He ordered coffee, black, the same way he'd always taken it at Stella's, and we sat across from each other in a booth that felt both familiar and completely different from our previous interactions. I wanted to apologize, he said without preamble, not for the business I was involved in. I made those choices, and I'm paying the consequences, but for putting you in a position where you had to deceive people who cared about you. I stared at him. That's not how undercover work functions, Marcus. You didn't put me in that position. I chose it. Maybe, but I've had 2 years to think about those conversations we had. About your family. About feeling like you weren't living up to expectations. I know that was part of your cover, but some of it felt real. He was right. Some of it had been real. The guilt about lying to people you loved. That wasn't an act, was it? No, that wasn't an act. Marcus nodded. I wanted you to know that the person you were pretending to be, Patricia Wells, the waitress who was struggling to figure out her life, was a good person. She was kind to people who didn't deserve kindness. She listened to problems she didn't need to hear. She made people feel less alone during difficult times. That person was a liar. The circumstances were a lie. The kindness wasn't. The way you treated people wasn't. And I wanted you to know that it mattered, even if it was part of an investigation. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the strange intimacy of a conversation between people who'd shared something real within a framework of complete deception. What are you going to do now? I asked. Try to build something legitimate. I have a nephew who's starting a construction business. He's willing to give me a chance if I can prove I'm serious about staying clean. And are you serious about staying clean? Marcus smiled, and for a moment I could see the person who'd worried about the exhausted waitress working too many overnight shifts. Ask me again in a year. After he left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me from family disappointment to federal recognition, to this moment of closure with someone who'd been both a target and a friend. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. How did it go? I typed back, better than expected. I think we both got what we needed. That evening, I drove to the cemetery in Towson where my grandmother was buried. Eleanor's mother, who died when I was in college, had been the family member who'd always believed I'd find my own path to success, even when that path wasn't clear to anyone else. Standing at her grave, I thought about the conversation she might have had with me about choices, consequences, and the complicated relationship between truth and deception in work that mattered. I think you would have understood, I said to the headstone, about doing necessary work that looks like failure from the outside, about protecting people who never knew they needed protection. The sun was setting as I drove back toward Baltimore, past the neighborhoods where I'd spent 3 years building a case that had made the city safer. Past Stella's all-night cafe, which was now just another restaurant instead of a front for criminal operations. Past the warehouse in Fells Point, which had been converted into luxury condominiums for young professionals who would never know how close they'd come to living next to a crime scene. My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment complex. Eleanor. Patricia, darling, I hope I'm not calling too late. Tyler and Amy just set their wedding date, June 15th. Amy specifically requested that you be her maid of honor. She wants me to be her maid of honor? She said, and I quote, "I want someone who knows how to handle a crisis and won't disappear during the ceremony." I laughed. Tell her I accept. And Eleanor? Yes, darling? Thank you for understanding why I had to keep secrets, for being proud of me even when you didn't know what I was doing. Oh, Patricia, we were always proud of you. We just didn't know what we were proud of. After hanging up, I sat in my car for a few more minutes, looking up at the windows of my apartment building. Normal life, with normal neighbors who had normal jobs that didn't require federal security clearances or psychological evaluations. But as I walked toward the building, I realized that normal wasn't what I wanted anymore. The training program was expanding, with requests from field offices across the country for agents who could conduct effective long-term operations. There was talk of developing international protocols, of sharing techniques with allied agencies facing similar challenges. Real work. Meaningful work. Work that mattered enough to sacrifice for, and family who finally understood why the sacrifice was necessary. Tomorrow I will start planning the curriculum for the next training class. Next month I will be Amy's maid of honor, present and accountable for one of the most important days in my brother's life. Next year I would probably be teaching agents in other countries how to disappear into criminal organizations and emerge with intelligence that saves lives. And for the first time since I'd started this journey, those three futures felt like they belonged to the same person. Patricia Kellerman, federal agent. Patricia Kellerman, sister and daughter. Patricia Kellerman, teacher and protector. All true, all real, all finally authentically mine. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.